Hello folks, welcome back to the shop. This is a lathe update progress video / clarification. So last video I sort of introduced this project, but I didn't really go into very much detail or coherence or any of that stuff. So let's address some of those things. So first of all, what is this? Well, now it's parts of, but this is a 1920s-ish South Bend metalworking lathe. I've got a serial number here that I managed to find, and it is 828. Now, apparently I can call South Bend or somebody, and I can get the manual and the blueprints and various other things for it. And when I have that information, I'll make sure to share it with you. I really hope I can, because it'll be really helpful in terms of this project, and I think you'll understand why here soon. Now, another thing I didn't really talk about in the last video is what a metalworking lathe is for. Now, what a lathe does in general is in real simple terms, is it takes power from somewhere, a motor, a line shaft or something, transfers it to a shaft that holds your work, and then it spins it at your controllable velocity, right, by how you deal with the gearing and all that stuff. So it turns the work, and then you have an arrangement of various things that we'll go into, various parts that help you hold a tool against that work to cut it and remove metal in a controlled and precise way. You can use this to cut lead screws or long gears. You can use it to make shafts or lots of other various and sundry things. So the metalworking lathe is primarily about precision stock removal from rounded parts, and yeah, that's what it's for. You can use it for other things. You can use it for hand shaping, kind of. It's not like like you could hand shape wood. Metal's a totally different material, so you're not going to be able to do some of the things you could do with wood as easily. And you could turn wood on it as well, but you notice the distance from where the chuck would be to the ways, which is this bed here, is not a very great distance, so you wouldn't be able to make great big bowls or anything like that. There's another part that'll go here. It's over on the bench now. I'll show it to you in a little bit, and it's called the tailstock. You can either hold tools in it, or you can turn between centers, so you can actually have that work held on both sides, both on the tailstock and in the chuck, much like a woodworking lathe. So I hope that addresses some of the questions about what we're actually dealing with here, and what we're trying to do. The idea is that we want to restore this and fix it in such a way that it maintains or gain, it's probably not going to gain, but so that we can keep it as a precise machine tool. You know, wood lathes are great, but for precision and the machining of metal, or the lathing of metal, you need a metal lathe. Okay, I hope that is clear as mud. Alright, let's move on over to the bench. Alright, we moved on over to the bench here, and first of all, I don't know if I talked much about the motor mount type situation, and I'm not necessarily happy with it. I didn't really tell why I was not so happy with it. Part of it is because of just space concerns. I don't necessarily want to have a super long motor mount out behind the machine, but also the fact that this shaft moves a little bit too much, or a lot too much, on in between these two bushing and the bearings. And I mean, the motor definitely works, but I want to clean it up a little bit, and I want to move this switch out of the way. I think I talked a little bit about why, because just in terms of the belts are running this way, and I don't want to get hung up in them. The other thing is I want to rewire this machine so that it has a couple emergency stop switches, one being a foot lever and another one that the machine won't run unless the chuck key is in the holder that I make for it. So just to sort of try to avoid that bonehead mistake of leaving the chuck key in the chuck and wrecking myself with it. I don't necessarily think I'm going to do that, but you know, hey, if I'm going to go to the bother of learning electronics, you know, my brother's been trying to get me into electronics for years. If I'm going to go to the bother, might as well go whole hog and you know, really learn something. So I'll make videos about that. That's an actual project. Oh, sorry for the noise there, kicking the metal. Moving out to the right here, you know, things are getting cleaned up. I'll talk about the first problem I ran into, and I brought some of the parts over from the ways, from the lathe, so that you could see where things go. Now this combination pinion and lead screw actually slides right along in here, okay? And besides the fact that some of the threads on this are busted out, which is not so good, other than that they're crisp. I just think it got crashed at some point, which means that something went wonky and bad things happened. But basically this bushing or bearing fell apart in my hands. It's made of brass, and if I can't get one of these off the shelf, I'll have to make one. My uncle told me about a type of brass that's got oil or lubricant encapsulated in it, so we might go that route. The trick is making one of these without a lathe, so might have to do some weird jigging and other things with drill press, and maybe just a lot of hand grinding and sanding and filing and stuff. So the general idea is that some of these parts are not ideal, but what the idea would be is to make new parts, right? So get the lathe put back together, and I need to make another situation here. I do it. I make a new situation. The issue with cutting these teeth on this pinion gear would be a little bit harder since I don't have a mill, so I might have to get that done or something, but I could definitely, you know, definitely work on it, right? Use the tool to fix the tool. Coming on over, we've got, this is the shaft for the back gears, and these are gears that rotate into the spindle, and the spindle's over on the other bench, but you look how they're offset there. Kind of cool situation, and we'll talk about why that is later when I get more into it. These actually had shims in there, and the shims were made out of old Rainy Ear cans, so aluminum shims. I don't know if I'll go with factory shims or go get myself a can of Rainy Ear. We'll see how this project goes, right? And I'll meet back with you over on the other side of the bench. All right, coming over here to the other side of the bench. This is more of the gearbox, or some of the gearbox. I haven't seen any of the contents of that yet. The main lead screw, it's got a little slot in it. We'll go into later in another video what that's for and how that works. Here's the rack that the carriage rides along, which reminds me, I need to make sure to tell you that this is actually not a pinion gear. It just interfaces with another gear, so I was wrong. I misnamed that. It doesn't interface with this directly. It works with the carriage, and how all that goes. I brought the spindle mount over here so you could see where this shaft goes. It goes, because of the light you can't see, but there's a hole in there, and it mounts in there, and a couple gears right on it. And I'm going to gear up for the talk on what I had to do here. And yeah, when I say I had to gear up for it, it's mostly just that this was sort of the biggest problem I've run into so far. I've been trying to figure out the best way to talk about it. So I feel like the best way to talk about it is to first tell you how gears and shafts typically work together. If you have a gear on a shaft and it's just sitting there, the gear is going to want to turn, or the shaft is going to want to turn, and they're not going to want to be together. So what you have in a gear is something called a keyway, and in that keyway will go a key. Okay, you see here it's a type of key called a Woodruff key. Got a bigger one here so you can see what it's shaped like a little moon. And on the shaft, see there, those are 2 key seats. This shaft actually holds 2 gears. So the other gear was fine, the one in the front, but this one, it had no key in it. No key, you say. Well, what was holding it on? Well, somebody back in the day, they fixed her up real good, and they put a set screw right in there, and it was all at a cattywampus angle, and the head was all rounded off, and it was all just nub. I couldn't get a hold of it at all, so I ended up having to drill it out, which, you know, if you know about drilling metals of different hardnesses, it was a real bear cat. So I ended up having to, well, I gouged the shaft here, so I had to weld that up. I've got a little bit more work to do on that and make sure it's absolutely round. And then I got a little bit of drill stock in here that I put a flat on it so it doesn't impinge on the shaft way here. But that's just Loctited in there for now, and that's just gonna have to work that way. Don't really have a whole lot of choice. I couldn't leave it sitting there together because it was well, it was a mess, and it was, you know, having a shaft and a gear not turning correctly and not being secured. I just didn't want to deal with the problems down the road. So yeah, I was real careful welding this up to make sure that I didn't bend this. You know, when you heat something up, it can warp, and I think I got that managed. So we'll just do a little bit more work here, and you know, I'm sorry I didn't bring you along for that journey, but that was not necessarily a family-friendly affair. It was a little bit of it was an ordeal. It was an adventure. There we go. That's what it was. It was an adventure. So moving on down the way, got bags to help keep everything from just sort of snowballing and, you know, a can of wormsing all over the place. Alright, and on to the final bench. You could call this the roughing bench. This is where I've been doing the main cleaning jobs. So here we have the main part of the carriage assembly. It's got an arm or a lever here that, well, it doesn't have it, so I have to make one. And what that does is it controls the gearing inside here and switches things over, and that's a bit important. Now, we'll go into this. I might actually do a whole video on this when I pull this apart, because, you know, there's clockwork going on here, and, you know, if you don't have much experience with machinery and how, you know, gears work together and things, you might look at this and go, oh man, there be dragons, there's lions and tigers and bears going on. But, you know, it's alright. You just keep your wits about you and pay attention, and it all works out, hopefully, right? You've got all the, as long as you don't have extra parts when you're done, right? So moving on down, just general more parts to clean up. You see, you know, we've got rust and things here, and the idea is to not take metal off, right? Just to clean it up, so that we don't, you know, we don't do any more harm than has already been done by the rust. And, you know, we get to deal with fun things like sliding dovetails in metal, right? I mean, maybe you see these in your old-fashioned antique cabinets and the drawers and all that stuff. Well, here they're done in metal, and that's not uncommon. So, actually, very common. It's just kind of cool to see, you know, how all that stuff works. You know, you see it's got a bit of the old, well, the iron disease, right? And here we've got the tailstock that I was talking about earlier. This hole right here, I think is it's like a oil reservoir. I mean, I think it is. I was watching a video by Mr. Pete 222, or Tubal Cain, as he is also called, where he makes a little thingy for here, and maybe I'll put that below, because that's a good video, and he's a good guy to watch. But you'd use that back in the old days when you'd have a dead center And moving on down the bench from the tailstock, we have spindle and all the everything included with that. So we've got the chuck. This is a 3-jaw chuck. You see, 2, 3. It's got one slot for the chuck key, so I tighten here and it'll tighten all the way around. And the shaft's in good shape. You can see here on the pulley wheels, you know, some surface cleaning that needs to be done, and more on the back gear, and just general stuff. So we'll get this all cleaned up, and well, what do you know, Bob's your relation. You know, I really appreciate you watching, and I hope that you come back again soon. If you wouldn't mind giving me a comment down below about what you might want to see from me in the future, or questions you might have, things that I need to answer a little bit better. I'm here to do that. I'm trying to figure this whole thing out, so I really appreciate your time.